Hello, hello.
Hey.
All right,
Hello.
we got everything set up. Welcome, everybody. Today we have a few things to talk about before we get started. That we're super excited about. So Dad, why don't you start talking about that really quick?
Yeah, very exciting news. Version 2, edition 2 of The Hero's Tale is now live on Amazon. Woohoo! We'll put the link in the chat here in just a moment. Very exciting.
Yep.
And we've been, the three of us, as well as others in our playtest group, have been working on this for about 3 years now, steadily. Testing different ideas. We've gone through so many revisions and we finally come back. And it's exciting because it's pretty much a similar game, but so many of the balance issues and the flow issues have been worked out. It is so cool, story driven, family friendly. It's all there. It's great. It rocks.
I love one thing I do want to talk about the new edition really quick before we get into today's topic is we have reworked how these skills work. So that way they're a lot more streamlined and that character creation doesn't take 2 hours. Which is fantastic. It makes the flow go so much quicker, so much better. And yeah. Really quick, let's all introduce ourselves. For those who don't know me, I'm Brendan, Edgy Erebus. Jacob, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Jacob. You can find me at PKJ Gaming as that one guy who writes geeky stuff.
And I'm Mark, and the three of us are the co-creators of The Hero's Tale, and I am the wordsmith guy. I have also written 2 fantasy novels based on the system of the game, and yeah, it all rocks.
All right, well, let's get into today's topic then, which is dungeon delving, but we're going to start off with a different aspect of that for our creature feature, and that is trap monsters. So the first one that always comes to mind when I think trap monster is the Mimic. It is an iconic, ironic that it's iconic because it is the iconic chest that opens up with jaws and stuff like that is not the true form of the Mimic. The Mimic is formless that creates these forms. So it's kind of fun that we can think of trap monsters and the Mimic comes to mind first.
Right. The Mimic can really be just about anything you want it to be.
Oh, for sure. You can. I've seen Mimics being used as health potions. That as soon as someone opens them up and starts to drink, it bites down and begins spraying the what's it called? The ooze that creates it, the shapeless matter. And stuff like that, and then suddenly starts to hurt the person instead of healing them. It's a bit dangerous, but it can be a lot of fun and add a lot of tension really quickly, as suddenly the party doesn't know which of their potions are mimics and which aren't.
A friend of mine told me this interesting twist where you do a couple of rooms where there's mimics, and so people kind of get tense and nervous about these treasure chests that are mimics, right? And you do that whole trope, and then they come across a room with a chest, and they're all checking it for traps and poking it and prodding it, and it seems to be solid and it seems to be wood, and they open it up, and now there's gold in it. Finally, we found the treasure, and each gold piece is a baby mimic, which jumps up and starts attacking them.
I have to find it here. In D&D, there's actually a thing known as a gold golem or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if I can find it. Maybe it was a homebrew thing that I saw, but yeah, I can't find it. But it's fantastic because creating this golem out of the coins, or this mimic out of the coins, is fantastic. I ran what's that module called? Dungeon of the Mad Mage for a bunch of friends, and one of my favorite moments was a bit of a twist that I'd gotten from a guide that I had bought off of not drive-through RPG, DM's Guild, that's what it's called. And one of the things that it recommended is, if things get boring, make it not boring by dropping down a sack of gold next to the party. And the moment that they opened up the bag of gold, they all knew it was a trap. They started poking it and prodding it and nothing. And when they opened up the bag of gold, the gold slinked out and attacked, and it was a mimic. And it's just a fun way to, like, they knew it was a trap, but they still opened it up anyway. Your players will do it.
Because it's gold.
Because it's gold, and the chance that it's not a mimic is worth the risk. One thing I want to touch on really quick before we swap off of the mimic, because there's so many trap monsters to talk about, is in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, they mentioned how to set up a mimic colony. And what a mimic colony is it is a group of mimics that have decided to work together for the express purpose of fooling everyone. So things like the mimics will be the chairs, the tables, but they will all be in one giant mimic that is their leader, that they all connect to telepathically, and that is the house. So the entire house itself is a mimic. And then when the smaller mimics kill the people inside, then the house gets fed by some of the leftovers. And it's just kind of a fun idea. And I love how they have this whole thing set up for how to do it.
It was a long, long time ago, back in the day, long before you guys were even born. I had made this dungeon, essentially, and we'll talk about it a little more, talk about all kinds of things when we get into the dungeon crawling part of today's discussion. But there was essentially what you described. The couches, it was like a library reading room. The couches were mimics. Some of the books were mimics. The carpet was a mimic, and I called it the living room.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's fantastic because everything's alive.
Right.
That's great.
Of course, the mimic's not the only kind of creature that can be a trap, but there's a point that I want to make with a lot of these, but I think I'm going to actually hold off and make it during our dungeon crawl part. Remind me to talk about the ecology of dungeons.
Anyway. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is the second most iconic trap monster, and that is oozes and slimes.
Yeah.
The first one that comes to mind is the gelatinous cube.
Right.
Invisible, practically. It's transparent.
Cleaning crew.
Yeah, cleans up the dungeons. The first time I ran it in the Dungeon of the Mad Mage, I mentioned that the walls and the floor was spotless, and that as they walked, they did not see a speck of dust, and they were confused as they continued walking until they eventually literally walked into the gelatinous cube. Roll for initiative. You know. The second time that I mentioned that there was a spotless hallway, they were all very much on edge, and very much like one person specifically said that he was holding his sword out and walking forward with the sword point extended so that way he could feel any resistance. And they were walking all around. They sadly ended up avoiding the room that the gelatinous cube was in. But it was fun seeing the tension that it caused, because suddenly it wasn't just a clean dungeon, it was
danger.
It was danger. And so then later on down the line, I set it up so that way some of the there was a floor where the person was a wizard, and the wizard had brooms that magically cleaned up the hallways. So there was no gelatinous cube, but they walked around as if there was one until they saw the brooms doing the cleaning. Stuff like that, and throwing players off is fun. Another one that I want to mention is the Slithering Tracker from Volo's Guide to Monsters. I've had this one personally used against me. It's a creature, an ooze that looks like a water puddle, and then will try to like take over the person's body and drown them from the inside. Also a very fun creature, very fun ooze. And a lot of the oozes actually have that same type of, what am I trying to say? That same type of false appearance. The gray ooze, for example, looks like a rock. The black pudding, though it does not have the specific feat of false appearance, has that, it looks like a pool of tar.
Right.
Stuff like that, that it makes it a lot of fun to just throw it out there and hope that your players don't look too deep into it. And if they do, well, roll for initiative.
There's one particular trap monster that a lot of people don't think of as a trap monster, but it fits so beautifully in that genre in practical usage, and that is the giant spider.
Okay.
And that's so useful because it can drop from above, it can tangle you up in webs. There's just all kinds of things that can happen as you stumble into its lair. It also very much fits the ambiance of the dungeon, you know, the deserted area, lots of spider webs. People don't think much of it, but suddenly the spider webs get thicker, and all of a sudden the big one is dropping on you, and then it's a fight.
One D&D variant that they've done very well, that we've sort of done a minor mimic version of, is the phase spider. Having a spider that can just phase in and out of existence has been so much fun in the past. In that same Dungeon of the Mad Mage campaign, the players walked into a room that was covered in webs. They found a body hanging that was moving and it was still alive. And as they went to go cut it, they suddenly were glaring into 8 eyes as a spider phased into existence right next to them. Which was just so cinematic, and the players suddenly all started freaking out as this spider vanished and a new one appeared in the same turn, and then a new one appeared. And so now they're thinking, all right, are there 3 spiders? Are there 2? Did this one just teleport? Did it phase out? As they weren't sure what was going on. And it was so much fun just having, like, you know when you put those like blinking lights on your Christmas tree? That happening with spiders is just so much fun.
Merry Christmas! That's a nightmare before Christmas.
Yeah, Jacob?
Although Doctor Who has taught me never to trust a Christmas tree.
Yes,
Okay.
never trust a Christmas tree.
Any Doctor Who fans will get that.
Yes.
There's a couple of other trap monsters that I think are a lot of fun. And then we should probably get into our main topic. And that is the natural false appearance monsters, such as the dark mantle that appears to be a stalagmite or stalactite. Yeah, one of the two. And then essentially, when they get near their enemy, they flap out like wing or like a squid almost that can fly and create magical darkness in an area near them, and then start suffocating their people. Or the piercers that also look like stalagmites.
Okay, so
stalactites.
here's a quick geology lesson. No extra charge for everybody.
Okay.
A stalagmite might reach the ceiling. A stalactite hangs tight to the ceiling.
Okay.
And that's how you can remember.
There
Carry
are
on.
piercers that can be stalactites, which essentially they just hold on to the top of the ceiling, and then they're kind of pointed shaped, and when someone's below them, they come down and either try to bite or stab into the person down below them, taking damage as well as they fall, but trying to drop and kill someone. Or the much more monstrous version of these two creatures, the roper, which appears as a giant stalagmite or stalactite, and then when the players get close enough, lashes out with large tendrils and tries to pull them in to bite. That's also a very, very fun way of using those like natural caves as a dungeon.
All of these monsters serve one primary function for the narrator or the dungeon master. Paranoia.
Exactly.
To establish fear of
yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
Before long, your party is creeping along like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next?
And that's what happens, is if you lay enough of these out and you use them spread out but frequent enough, that your players start to think, all right, can I trust the door? Will the door bite me when I try to open it? Which can slow things down, but it's also a lot of fun as the players are trying to figure out, all right, well, if it does bite, what position do we want to be in? And then they have to think tactically and combat ready about every activity. Opening a door, opening a chest, reading a book, walking past this group of stalagmites, just walking through a cave wondering, is something going to fall on my head and kill me? It creates this air of tension that is just so much fun. With that, let's get into our main topic, which is how to run dungeon delves, as we've kind of set this up with the trap monsters. You wanted to talk about was it the ecology?
Yeah, but let's get into that in a minute.
Yep.
Let me scritch my old gray beard here for just a moment and reminisce about way back in the day of
It was only dungeon delves.
yeah, pretty much when first edition came out, followed by basic and advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which is essentially second edition. It was predominantly dungeon crawls. In fact, that's really why they called it Dungeons and Dragons, right? I had been probably playing the game for 1 or 2 years before it finally occurred to us in our group, oh my gosh, we could do an above ground adventure. When we came out of the dungeon with our treasure, we just start cha-chinging and subtracting gold pieces and adding equipment. And it didn't occur to us that we could actually play that as a negotiation. We could actually go into the town, and there could be brigands in the town, and we didn't even think of, oh my gosh, we could actually trek across the wastelands to get to Mordor. It's like everything was just going in down a hallway and knocking on a door and picking the lock and checking it for traps, and we had this whole litany of processes that you had to do every time you came to a door. It was a lot like Munchkin.
Well, it's partially what inspired Munchkin.
Oh, it totally is what inspired Munchkin, yes. And Munchkin did a beautiful job of making fun of that. You know, you kick down a door, you kill the monster, you take his treasure. That was what Dungeons and Dragons was all about. And that does kind of lead me into the topic. Well, no, let's hold off on a little bit. I'm keep throwing out these teasers, but we had a lot of fun creating the maps and the layouts of the rooms and the levels of the dungeon crawls.
It's interesting to see the evolution between, you know, Dungeons and Dragons First Edition to now, where now almost dungeon delving is an afterthought, and it's more story focused.
Yeah, and even if you are doing dungeon delves, even that is a lot more roleplay focused than it was back in your time.
Back in the day.
Back in the before times.
One big thing with that's changed is how you roleplay and how you set up role-playing encounters in the dungeon. Such as in Dungeon of the Mad Mage, there's a group of bandits that are all failed actors and are pretending to be vampires.
Yep.
It's just hilarious.
They're LARPing.
Exactly, and it's
They're
so much
meta-LARPing.
fun. Yeah. It's so much fun to have your players walk in and you hear, "Give me your money before I suck your blood." You know, like...
Blah, blah, blah.
And they charge the toll to get past. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. And it's fun to just have those strange encounters, you know? Where the players aren't sure how to react. Do we kill the bandits? Are they actually vampires? If they're actually vampires, we cannot kill all 12 of them. We're level 3. Thank you. You know, that kind of a thing. And so my players ended up taking a risk and attacking, and they cornered one of the guys, and he immediately broke character after most of his men had been defeated. He was the captain. He immediately broke character and was like, "Listen, I'm sorry, I didn't think this would happen," and apologized and gave them help throughout the rest of that floor of the dungeon. But it's fun having those setups, because the party spent a bit of time deliberating on what they were going to do. I didn't give them too much time because they're standing right next to the bandits, but it was fun. And then there's a whole floor dedicated to just like role-playing with one character and finding out she's absolute whack. I don't want to spoil much of that because of if anyone else is playing it, but it's amazing how they've set up the role-playing encounters there. That being said, setting up fun and unique challenges that are non-combat and non-role-playing is also a very important part of dungeons.
Right. Tricks and traps to figure out
Right.
instead of just monsters to kill.
Mm-hmm. Or setting up, there was a in Dungeon of the Mad Mage yet again, it's, a 23-floor mega dungeon. It has an example for everything. They had a flame skull that they had repurposed into a lightning skull, and they had set up a room with an entirely copper bottom. And what they did was they had this thing known as a flesh golem start to attack the players, and flesh golems are healed by lightning. So any of the players that are on this copper tiling would then get electrocuted by the thunder or the lightning skull zapping the ground, and it would also be healing the flesh golem at the same time. So it was doing damage to the enemies, healing the flesh golem, and the players couldn't get close enough to attack the lightning skull because they'd have to step onto the lightning flooring. And overall, it was in combat, but it was a unique challenge that they ended up walking away from and then coming back later to deal with. So it's a lot of fun setting up those types of challenges and trials. Setting up traps that have unique ways of overcoming them are great. The usual pit trap is fine, but if you really want to mess with your players, set up a trap and a combat encounter at the same time. I was creating my own dungeon for this hell adventure that we were going through, and I set up a trap where they would get locked in a room that would start filling with poisonous gas, and there were monsters in there that prevented teleportation, so they couldn't just teleport out, and those monsters were immune to poison. So now the party's dying of this poison, trying to solve the trap while they're being attacked by the monsters that are preventing them from being from teleporting out of there. And overall, it made for a very tense combat encounter.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
That's important. Hmm?
So as we are on a time crunch here, I do want to talk about the dungeon ecology. And this is one of the big problems I've had with most dungeon crawls, including a lot of the ones that I have run myself. And that is all based around the question, why? If you start asking the question why enough, it gets kind of problematic for dungeon crawls. I mean, on the surface, you're coming up to a door, the party's coming up to a door, you check it for traps, you kick it in, and there's a monster there. Why is that monster there?
Right.
How did it get there? How does it feed? How does it live? How does it mate and breed with other monsters of its kind if it's the only one in the space?
Right.
Right? Who put it there? How did it get in this room? As somebody is creating a dungeon, sometimes they just say, okay, here's a door, we need a monster there, let's look down the list. Okay, we'll put this monster in that room, we'll put this monster in that room, and they don't even really consider how the monsters interact with each other. Would they kill each other and eat each other? Or are they just sitting there waiting for adventurers to come and be their food?
It's a tricky balance.
And then you create an additional layer of meta question.
Thank you, Dallin, for the follow.
why is this dungeon here? Who
Mhm.
dug it?
Right.
Why did they dig it? Is it just here?
Hmm.
For example, in the most recent dungeon crawl I ran
Hmm.
was in Ballroom Battlefield.
Yep.
The characters had to go into the catacombs underneath the cathedral of the Church of Three Lights and fight some of the cultists, the Dragon Flame cultists that had basically teamed up with the higher archbishops of the church and one of the houses of the king. So why was that space there? Well, probably because it was built as a part of the base of the cathedral in the first place. And part of why were the people there and why were the monsters there? Well, they had captured a dragon and they were trying to subdue and domesticate this dragon. Right?
Yeah.
And of course the party ended up freeing the dragon, which was very nice, and they were happy about that. So was the dragon, frankly. But that particular adventure, I tried to answer the whys. You know, why is this space here? Well, who dug it? Why are the people here? Why are the monsters here? Why would they trap this particular door and not that particular door? All of those kinds of things tend to me to make a more cohesive experience for the players.
When you think about it, the big questions for storytelling are who, what, why, where.
Yeah, exactly.
And figuring all of those out, and how, and figuring all of those out is very important to make the dungeon not feel just like a slog fest.
Well, and I do have to say,
sometimes
in all seriousness,
fun.
Sometimes it is fun just to go on a monster killing spree. I get that. Kill the monsters, take their treasures. Sometimes that can just be a blast. Sometimes you don't want quite so cerebral a game. I get that. I tend to enjoy the role playing a lot more in the long run, but sometimes it's just fun to roll dice and see who lives.
Well, it's why people play Monster Hunter.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it is fun to have those fights, but if you set them up in such a way, like, one thing I found is that there are certain monsters that you wouldn't at all think work well together, but just have so much like fun little synergies. Excuse me. I'm trying to remember what it was, but I had run a oh, you know what it was? It was a gelatinous cube, actually. And they had a creature that could shove. And what had happened was the creature and the gelatinous cube, though neither of them could talk, had essentially come to a symbiotic relationship where it would shove the creatures into the gelatinous cube, which would kill the creature, kill the players, and then spit out the rest for the other creature. And stuff like that made it much more fun and interesting and answered a lot of those why questions.
And there's forgive me for changing the subject a little bit, but there's a old adage as a game designer, well, not adage, but there's a channel on YouTube called Extra Credits, and they did an episode on mechanics as red herring. Now, most of the reasons you'd have mechanics as red herrings basically what it meant was you have pieces of a game seem totally bad on their own. And for most of the reasons, they didn't like it. But for one of the reasons, they did. And that was combining abilities that don't seem very powerful in ways that make them powerful.
Yeah.
Like that shoving creature.
Mm-hmm.
That's not very powerful on its own, but when combined with the gelatinous cube, suddenly.
Mm-hmm. It was a guaranteed hit for the gelatinous cube.
Yeah.
So there's one last thing I want to mention before we end off today's stream, and that is how to create a dungeon if you aren't artistic in any way or form, and you have no creativity, and you're just stuck, but you want to run a dungeon. My favorite thing is there's a website called Donjon, something like that. And I'll throw a link here in the chat. And it has a ton of random generators for literally no reason. Like, some of them are absolutely useless, but they are so much fun. And one of their big things that they have is a random dungeon generator that will come up with encounters and the floor design and not print you out, you have to print it yourself, but it'll create a map for you and everything. And it is just fantastic. So here's the link to that, and I will also be putting that down in the doobly-doo in the under the video.
There is another tool that's aiming to be that kind of, if you have no artistic ability or creative ability, they have adjustable, randomly generated
what is it?
Dungeon and room tiles, and it is called Dungeon Alchemist.
I've seen them before. I've used them, but I've never actually used them for one of my campaigns. But it's fantastic. And if you don't like the design of the map, you can actually just recreate it in your map maker of your choice. I use Dungeon Draft, but I've also used Dungeon Painter Studio, Incarnate, and all of those work. I don't think you can directly import it, but it creates a grid for you and everything, so you can see exactly how many squares to draw out and stuff like that. Overall, it helps out a ton, and will come up with the encounters and traps and secret doors and all of that stuff for you.
And if you don't want to spend money on any of this, a lot of tools, if you're playing online, have tools so that you can easily, quickly draw dungeon rooms.
Then on the other end of the extreme, we can go back to our very first episode and talk about dungeon terrain and building actual visuals of tiles and and rooms and doors, and it's crazy.
If you like making terrain, a dungeon is your best
friend. That's a lot of fun to look at.
And your players will always remember the countless rooms that you either already had set up or that you create as you're playing. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us into this delve into dungeon delving.
And let me throw out, again, a great thanks to my game co-creators, to Jacob and Brendan, for the vast amount of work and effort you've put into 2nd edition, The Hero's Tale. Come check it out.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed. If you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. If you're not watching this on YouTube, go to our YouTube channel and like and subscribe. And we hope to see you all later.
Also, leave a comment.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.